Hi everybody, Samwise, your local community herbalist here, and happy December. This month's herb of the month is pine, which is a pretty big herb as far as herbs go, and that's it right there. That's our neighbor's pine tree. You can see that this time of the year, everything else is a little bit dead. Here's some of the other trees around. It's actually a really beautiful day today. But here we have this beautiful, very tall, very vital and alive, magical friend pine, and I'm really excited to talk to y'all about some of the research and learnings that I'm finding about this plant. It's been in my life for a while, and so I want to share a little bit about what I'm meditating on with it. I actually look at this pine every morning when I look out of we have a meditation room now, which is a blessing. I look out the window and I see this tree. It's the biggest tree in the neighborhood, and pine in a lot of ways is about like clearing energy and clearing unnecessary guilt and shame, and attaining a clear-headedness and perspective that can be useful for figuring out the next steps, or figuring out, what needs to happen to remedy or heal a situation in order to move forward and free up some of that energy. So yeah, that's what I'm finding across my research. One of the books that I'm really excited to talk to you about today is this book called Celtic Tree Magic by Danu Forrest, which is about the Ogham tree alphabet. So in some Celtic traditions, there's symbols and sounds and kennings, or like poems, wisdom poems, associated with a number of trees. And this one is about pine. And in the book that I mentioned, there's a symbol. It kind of looks like a cross, and sometimes it's also interchangeable with fir. In Europe, sometimes these trees were kind of considered interchangeable, and we also might know them as, like, in the colonial U.S. as the trees that we often use as Christmas trees, which we'll get more into why. But so the kenning, or like the poem or the word association with pine is more of a sound, and it's ah, like that, or oh, or kind of this ah feeling or sound. And the kenning is the loudest groaning of a man or person in disease or wonder, and the beginning of calling, the beginning of answers. So it kind of has this like relief association with it, like and also understanding or insight. So that kind of thing. So, and in early Irish law, pine was one of the 7 trees that it was unlawful to cut down without proper without proper permission, and that was actually punishable by death. So that was a very serious crime to cut down something like this stately being here, which is why I personally feel like a real wanting to not bring in live, or dead now, trees cut down for Christmas. I would rather bring in like pine boughs or like branches that were trimmed, as a way to honor the tree spirit and the aliveness of the land spirit, rather than killing a whole tree. In my being, my little pagan heart is like, no, don't kill more trees for no reason. So I just thought that was interesting that in the history it's considered a very big no-no. So again, this tree is associated with like impetus or beginning, breaking new ground, motivation, revelation, perspective, clear-headedness, overcoming knotty problems, like not like something tied up in knots, not knotty problems, not knotty problems, and stuck circumstances resulting in relief or release. And I love that, because in the Bach essences, in the flower essence realm, pine is really associated with releasing unnecessary shame and guilt. And so I like this idea of kind of unknotting that, so we can have a more truthful and more clear vision of how to address something that's causing like discomfort, or that was causing harm. Yeah, and also as an evergreen, right, it symbolizes vitality and hardiness through the seasons, and also regeneration. So this is part of the reason why ancient Northern European peoples would bring in pine boughs into the home as a way to like honor the tree spirits and the land spirits, and invite in that energy of new growth and new vitality into the home, because things can get kind of stagnant in the winter. And yeah, there's also lots of traditions, which is kind of like the precursor for like the Santa mythology and like the elves mythology, of honoring the land spirits and like the household spirits of a particular region, and like giving them gifts so that they also take care of you. That's part of where like leaving out like, you know, treats for Santa or whatever came from, is this idea of like honoring the tree spirits and the land spirits and the house spirits, so that they continue to protect you and keep you safe, and keep the home a safe place to be. So bringing in pine boughs was part of that, as especially a part of like bringing in the sense of like vitality. So yeah, and so then pine could also decorate the Yule log, and the Yule log itself, if you've heard of like put the Yule log on the fire, is another like particularly Norse, although like there's lots of interchange and like lots of moving and swapping around of traditions. The Yule log was traditionally like an oak or an ash log, but could sometimes be decorated with pine boughs. And the Yule log was all about again, like this promise of like protection, and kind of connected also to this idea of like perpetual fire that promises the sun's return. And again, that I like to think that's part of this like really ancient practice of the perpetual fires that were lit in some pagan traditions in northern, western, and eastern Europe, around tending a sacred flame always, and as part of that practice of regaining faith, or like tending the faith that the sun will return in the darkest times of the year. And so part of that was like a piece of the Yule log was kept after, you know, not letting it burn down completely, but keeping a little piece and reserving it for the next year, and that way kind of tending that fire across the years. And it's kind of interesting too that a lot of the legends and lore around this time of the year, which I'll get into in another video, some of like the deities and their stories, have a lot to do with death and rebirth, and the turning of the wheel in that way. But one I'll just mention really quickly, it has to do with this friend, and also the fir tree. There was one in the Celtic traditions of a deity named Attis, who was speared by a boar and then turned into a fir tree, and in that way was connected to like life after death. So that's a little bit about some of the lore. The physical properties of the tree are really interesting to consider too, because it is a really like stimulating, circulating, antimicrobial tree. So it has a lot of vitamin C in the pine needles itself. Some people call that like a survival tea if you're really needing vitamin C in the depths of winter when there's not a lot of fresh fruit. That's one way to get it. It's also pretty strong and a little bit tannic, I would say. So you might pucker your mouth a little. But in general, it's really, really antimicrobial, which is why, you know, so many like cleaning products are kind of like trying to be pine, but they're not actually pine. But it's really helpful for like clearing the air, clearing the, you know, the microbes off of like surfaces, and even in our lungs. It's useful for like steams of pine needles, not necessarily like the essential oil. You gotta be careful with that because that can be too strong, but like if you were to like gently boil some pine needles, that would be a really lovely antimicrobial steam if you had like a cold, and that would help move the cold through its cycle and resolve a little bit faster. Something also I think is really interesting is that in some of the herbal lore, like in the old herbals, for example, Cole Pepper is like a really old herbalist from like, I don't know, the Middle Ages. Don't go beyond that. But he talks about pine being associated with masculinity and Mars, and yeah, again, this energy of vitality, which I think is interesting on multiple levels, in the sense that, again, the energetic properties of pine have a lot to do with like resolving guilt and shame, but also in conjunction with like guilt and shame that's given to you by like masculine patriarchal forces in your life. And also, in a positive way, the pollen of pine is used as a vitality tonic, and I've used it, and other people in the gender-blessed realm, and also people who just want to support their natural testosterone production, use pine pollen as a way to support the body's testosterone uptake. And I can tell you from taking it, it's really interesting as a plant to take it, because I do feel a sense, like an uptick in my like vital energy, and I go outside of myself more. And sometimes I'd like to think about the energy of gender not necessarily being like this is masculine and this is feminine, but more like pushing or pulling, or like, you know, more physical like manifestations of how energy is moving forward or inward. Although, you know, that can be movable and changeable. Nothing is fixed. Everything is fluid. But my experience of taking pine pollen was that I went outside of myself more to like ask for what I wanted more, like in especially in like creating the kind of sexual life and connections that I wanted. So I was like asking for dates more, or like asking for what I wanted more, and that's where I really wanted some support, because I was socialized to not do that. So yeah, and it was gentler than like the pharmaceutical tea. So yeah, it was a really interesting tonic, which I hope to talk more about with my friend Carly Ketron on this month's Herb at the End of the World episode. So we'll see. Stay tuned for that. But yeah, again, kind of digging into some of these, like, you know, associations with the pine. That it is so tall is a thing, right? So like that's again talking about perspective, like kind of asking this tree for support and help can kind of pull us out of our own perspective and help us get the perspective from like a higher ground, like, you know, higher, some people say like higher selves, or like from a more divine perspective. And that again can be helpful for attaining like this clear-headedness that pine has associated with it, which in turn is useful for understanding the past and like the causes and effects along our ancestral bloodlines, so that once we understand, we can restore health and correct mistakes and imbalances. So in that way, like really helpful for, yeah, addressing that kind of knottiness that we talked about. So again, pine can clear confusion, stuck energy, revealing truths we would rather avoid acknowledging, clears the way for implementing changes in a new phase, and helps in transforming ignorance and inexperience and passive victimhood of lack of perspective into clarity, wisdom, and thus ability and effectiveness. And it also brings a sense of, like, again, this vitality, this endurance and positivity to those who have suffered a long time. So yeah, we're kind of getting this picture, right, of this like beautiful, powerful tree energy that's unblocking congestion, like clearing out the spirit and clearing out the vision and clearing out the actual, like, you know, if there's phlegminess in the lungs, can be helpful for that. And yeah, and I love how that's kind of connected to, again, clearing the conscious and helping to alleviate guilt, whether that's like deserved or imagined. That can help be, you know, clearing of the head and seeing ways forward to correct the situation and rectifying any hurt that's been caused, which in turn, like, that creates like space for renewed creativity, right, as stagnant energy is released, transformed into something positive. So that's a little bit from this book on the Celtic tree medicine and alphabet, which is like, so yeah, It's a good book. I'll put it in the notes of the video so you can check it out. Yeah, I'm really appreciating the research in that book, and it's just really resonating with my experience of pine. One of my like big memories, and you know, outside of looking at this tree every day and like feeling some of these like really deep memories associated with like, you know, my life right after my friend Dusty's murder, and like going through the trial and like just really having a hard time but having a lot of guilt about that. Like as I sit and I gaze on this tree, some of that's coming back up, and kind of I'm finding more compassion for myself in that time, and that it was a really difficult time, and that going through trials in our shitty justice system really, really suck and are re-traumatizing. And I'm just like finding again this compassion and kind of perspective on that. And I also have just in different times of my life had like found solace in like putting my back up against the trunk of pine and asking for support. And there's one moment when I was in Point Reyes where we traveled to the coast, and it was just a stormy, difficult day in both my spirit and the land. And I hiked all the way out to this tree on the edge of the coast and put my back against this tree and asked for support. And I literally felt like a warmth, like a literal warming of my like back and my spirit. And I felt this tree energy meeting me in this discomfort and this like turmoil, and providing a little bit of softness and solace, and again this perspective, so that I could approach it from a new angle when I returned home. So I think about that warmth along my spine a lot when I think about the energy of pine and how like upright and beautiful and strong it is. And yeah, so I wanted to share a little bit before we end. I know this is a long video, but there's just so much about trees. Tree medicine is just like, you know, should these be videos? Should these be books? I don't know, but we'll do what we can. But yeah, a little bit from the Flower Essence Repertory, which is written by Patricia Kaminski and Richard Katz. And the essence of pine being about self-acceptance, self-forgiveness, freedom from inappropriate guilt and blame. Pine helps the self to learn true forgiveness by literally being forgiving, learning to give oneself nourishment rather than withholding love from oneself, learning to release rather than retain energy, and moving from self-deprecation to self-acceptance as a pathway towards recognizing one's own sacredness and divinity. So maybe that's why we've been bringing pine into our houses all this time, is to remember that, especially when, you know, the times are difficult, and, you know, the veil is thin, and extra support is really needed. So with that, I want to close. I'm really excited to share more learnings about pine with you this month. There's just so much, and I'm excited to dig into that with y'all. And I also really want to thank all the patrons that are making this work totally possible and creating this really beautiful learning community that I'm so excited to nurture and share some of the ancestral remembrances that I'm digging up and nurturing as part of my offering to this world. So big thank you to Emma Rutland, Kelsey, Diana Clegg, Sarah Little, Lou Saunders, Julia Bauer, Honey Porter, Liz Fitzgerald, Morgan Kay, Net, Sarah Larson, Sarah McCullough, Lo Wesley, Lainey Peterson, Megastar Vega, Paris Antilion, Marguerite Wilson, Tatiana Kogan, Heather Enders, Jax Walter, Melissa Meldovan, Anna Fratalillo, Ellie Minkin, S.M. Cranston, Monica Lacerda, Karen Ram, Gloria Park, Adrian Wilson, Susan Raridan, Bonnie Rose Weaver, Brittany Hall, and Seed Minkin. So thank you so much to everyone that's making this work possible, that's helping me craft this trajectory of plant and ancestral healing and remembrance. And until next time.